Hello, and welcome to the Distillery. I'm your host, Harry Lee Shanglun, and today we have special guest, Phoebe Watson. Hey, Phoebe.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for coming in, or rather, Skyping in from afar. This isn't Skype. What am I saying? How's your day been?
Pretty good, actually. How about you?
Yeah, it's been good. My family's just finished watching church, which we do every Sunday downstairs, and I went for a really lovely walk outdoors this morning,
Nice.
so I'm feeling very happy and content.
A walk is so helpful. I did that the other day in the sunlight. It was so nice.
Oh man, it's just I think it's gonna rain in the next few days as well, so I'm like mentally preparing.
Yeah.
I'd just like to acknowledge that we're both streaming from the land of the people of the Kulin Nation, and that it is the end, or nearing the second half at least, of Reconciliation Week. I like to pay respect to elders past and present.
Thanks. And I would like to respect my elders from back home in Warrnambool on the Yarrer Gunditj Clan as well.
And so you are a proud Indigenous woman from the Yarrer Gunditj Clan of the Maar Nation.
Definitely, yeah.
And you're working in game design. Can you tell me a bit about that journey to how you got interested in games and what you do now?
Yeah, it was a very non-linear path, actually. So high school, I was very interested in like forensic science. I really wanted to be a forensic scientist thanks to shows like CSI and like Bones and things like that. And then my favorite subject started to be art, and I really liked fine arts and things like that. And I finished high school and I was like, well, like, what do I do? So I started looking at like courses. I was looking at fine arts courses, and RMIT was offering a games design course. I was like, I like video games. Like that's so cool. I've never seen that before. So I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. So I went to a bunch of interviews, and after the interview with Game Design, I was like, yeah, I think this is the one, and I got in. So studying game design, and then just through some context, actually, I was introduced to Paulina Sammy, who's the producer at DragonBear Studios, and they were looking for an Indigenous person who's interested in game design. And I was like, that's me. So we had a chat, and she brought me on board, and it's just been amazing since then.
And I mean, there's a lot of the things that you're doing with this game that they're creating, Chaos Tavern, but you've described your role as cultural consultancy. What does that actually entail?
Yeah, so basically, from the beginning, Paulina and the team have always really wanted this like Australian-inspired fantasy game, and they're very, very focused on having Indigenous culture in it, which is so awesome. And so we'll come up with some ideas, and we'll do some research, and we think, well, we kind of want to implement like X and Y into the game. But we need to make sure that this is appropriate to represent through community, because we're not all Indigenous on the team. So I will then take the things that we're really interested in, kind of like the concepts or more like specific like ideas that probably entail like, say, like wooden shields or spears or like things like that. I'll go out to elders in the community and ask like, what do you think? Do you think this is appropriate to represent? This is the kind of the context it's sitting in. And also I'll also give them an opportunity, like what do you think we should have represented? Like this is our culture, and this is a chance for, you know, young people, not just our young people, to experience their own culture in games, but everyone to kind of experience it in a new way. So and then I'll bring that back to the team and say, hey, this is a yes, we can put this in, don't touch this. This is like special knowledge that we all hold, and we'll move on from there and go through iterations like that.
It sounds like games are a particularly exciting opportunity for people, non-Indigenous people, to experience a different culture, one that is central to the land on which we live here in Australia.
Definitely.
What's the feeling for you as that conduit, as somebody who like walks in both worlds, so to speak, and connects this very modern idea of like video game design to ancient tradition and culture?
Yeah, it's actually really exciting for me, because growing up, culture has been this very old ancient knowledge, and something that we definitely need to remember. I've always been told like we really need to learn this in case it gets lost for whatever reason. And also being absolutely obsessed with video games growing up, and this very new technology with such an old thing, and things that I would never thought would ever combine, because my culture was always something very separate. You know, I had my father's Indigenous, and we had like all of his family, but it was still very separate to the rest of my life because I predominantly lived with my mum because my parents were separated. So now it's kind of really strange that it's something that I'm working in and like actively being a part of. It's really cool.
Can you talk through a little bit about your journey? I mean, it sounds like you've your relationship to culture has changed over that time.
It definitely has. So ever since I was little, my dad was very passionate about culture. Unfortunately, he didn't have much access to it, so he was very passionate about passing that on to his kids, which sometimes came off as like it was started to be like a chore almost. So I was always involved with cultural dance, and I love cultural dance, although I was like a very shy kid, so it was very like hit and miss. But when it came to like learning language, I can't roll my R's. My pronunciation is terrible, so that was so frustrating to me. And I'm like growing into like my angsty teenage phase, and it's getting worse, right? So I'm not even like, I just go through this phase where I'm not interested in it, and it's like, it sounds shocking to say now because I know there was this sense of guilt that I knew there were so many people who didn't have access to it, and I was getting given it, but I didn't want it. I wasn't ever ashamed, but I was never proud of it as a kid. And I was super lucky to be surrounded by friends who were like very understanding. I was never really bullied for it. I remember, I think one incident in primary school where someone mentioned it and all my friends were like, "You can't say that." And it was awesome. But I was still never really proud of it and never really embraced it until maybe a year ago, when I started working for Paulina and the team at DragonBear Studios. I kind of realized that being able to really increase like representation of Indigenous people in this whole new space that can reach so far and wide for so many different people, and just kind of really seeing that, I mean, like, wow, okay, this is something, we're doing something really cool here, and this culture that I'm a part of is so special, and like the potential that it holds is just, people haven't even seen that yet. Like, we all know fantasy inspired by like Western and European cultures, and it's like, yeah, wow. But like, this is like a whole new realm. So just seeing that kind of come to fruition is even more exciting.
What do you think the effects are of, I mean, tackling this institution of fantasy being very white, being very, you know, it's a particular type of imagining, and then subverting that history and kind of, you know, introducing your own culture, your own history into that. What's the effect on audiences, and what's the effect on the medium?
I think the effect on the medium as a whole, it just opens this whole other realm of creativity and inspiration. So like, we've seen what people can do with, you know, Western fantasy kind of ideals. We've got dragons and all these awesome things that have kind of really spread out, like just so much further than games and everything, like cosplay. So that is like a whole new like pocket of like really cool stuff that could like be explored. But then the effect on like the people and the culture is like, we get to share this, and not only is this sharing with people who aren't Indigenous, it's sharing with people who are Indigenous and haven't had access to culture. So this is a new way that they can like actively participate in it rather than just read it out of a book or on a screen. It's for kids who are finally seeing themselves in some kind of representation way. And yeah, I think it's really cool.
It sounds like such a great opportunity, and what you're doing is very important. What are some of the challenges that you faced in performing that role of, you know, either cultural consultancy or thinking through how culture gets represented?
Yeah, so the challenges that I personally have faced is, as an Indigenous woman, it's like, how much say do I get to have? Like, how much can I just like, yeah, I think that's fine. But I think that comes back to how our culture works. So a lot of our emphasis on our elders, they are like the pillars who look after everybody, and they're the knowledge holders because they've gone through so much that they know, and they know what's best. So I guess a little bit of challenge that I've had there is consulting with elders. So at the beginning, I struggled quite a bit with finding people to talk to and just being able to reach out, which is so understandable. Like we all know that like older people struggle with video games and technology as a whole. So trying to reach out to people who are even less likely to use technology and video games, like, hey, we're going to put our culture, something that is so special to us, out there for everybody. Like that would be really scary. So just trying to like help understand, like, no, this is a really good thing that's happening. Was a bit of a challenge, but I've been so fortunate to have elders work with us, and they're really excited about what we're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine the initial response was kind of like, "Oh, what?" But maybe.
Yeah, they're like, I'm not sure. But some of our most whimsical and fun ideas have actually come out of those consultations. So I'll give them like, hey, what do you think about this? And like, yeah, well, you could do this, and you could do this, and you could do this. And you're like, where did you pull this from? Like, that's so cool.
I'm so intrigued also about I'm going to use the word tension, not in a negative way, but just this idea of like, who is the arbiter of any given culture? And having a culture that that values elders, and they become like a spokesperson for a community that helps shape the culture in a very active way, but one that is also in communication with young leaders like yourself and you know, it's the local community. I guess I'm reflecting on the idea that like I think often, broadly speaking, First Nations people of color, like marginalized, oppressed minorities are often put up as the single voice of their community. Like, oh, now you represent all Asians,
Everyone,
like, all Indigenous people. Do you experience that yourself, and how do you mitigate that?
I think maybe a little bit, but I think my role kind of suggests otherwise. Definitely, there's a lot of emphasis on like speaking to elders and making sure the community as a whole is represented in a way that's like correct almost. It's hard because like no matter obviously what we'll do, there'll be someone who's disappointed, but having that support of the elders indicates that like, okay, like these people are respected, they know what they're doing, so maybe this is okay. But yeah, I definitely see that. It's like, as an Indigenous person, people believe that I would speak to everything, which is so incorrect, because not only are there like, there's so many different Indigenous groups and clans. If you look at one of the maps, it's like there's 50 within a single state, or for Western Australia, it's huge. And within those groups, languages are so different that communication like between two groups is completely different language. So that kind of representation is really difficult.
Totally. Do you have any, like, this came to mind, do you have any insights into like how to approach the multiplicity of histories when there's conflict in what people want or how people present those histories?
Yeah, so that was definitely issue that I tackled earlier on, is like which group do we speak to? And there's definitely value with speaking to the landowners that you are working on. But I think a lot of it is also what you're representing. So if you've like location-based, for example, so if you want to make a game about Indigenous culture in the Northern Territory, is you would find groups from that area specifically and get information from them primarily. It's definitely, I think, one of the most important things if you're thinking about putting Indigenous culture into the games.
And what's the approach that you've taken for something that's digital? And you said broadly it's Australian fantasy and wants to acknowledge the indigeneity implied in that history. But like, are you focusing on a specific group in the way that you represent that culture?
Yes, that's another thing. Good question, actually. Is like, if it's not specific, because I was like, again, it's like a fantasy land, so it's not specifically locations in Australia, but I have very close ties with elders at home, and we're getting a lot of support from the back there. So that's also where I come from. So that's where a lot of our focus is. But we also have some elders who are from Wurundjeri and the Kulin Nations, and we definitely always keep them in the loop and up to date with what's happening as well.
Right. So it's like person-based and place-based to create this digital space.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
This is really exciting and interesting to me. To zoom out a little bit from games specifically and kind of thinking more broadly about the fight for equality and justice locally here in Australia. What do you think the relationship of representation and actual outcomes of equality and justice? What is that link?
Oh, these questions are always so
question,
hard.
sorry.
It's a big question. That's okay. Yeah, I guess it's funny because Australia is very, there's this whole culture about being so chill and welcome to everybody, but there's a lot of, I think it's embarrassment and shame about what happened in the past because there is such a highlight on it. So it almost, from what I experience, comes off as don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about what happened. We'll acknowledge it during Reconciliation Week, but that's predominantly for Indigenous people to do things in, to celebrate their culture. This is not our thing, which is really unfortunate because Reconciliation Week is about reconciliation between two groups. But I think that shame is very strong and will be difficult to get past, which I'll tie into another kind of big issue was Australia Day, is that there was a lot of outrage about moving the date. A lot of people didn't understand why, and I think it was a good decision to move the date, and I want to acknowledge I think Triple J, Hottest 100, they're it's something so small, but to move their Hottest 100 countdown to a date that isn't on that specific day was such a big thing because that's the day what everyone celebrated for, right? Everyone wanted to have drinks and listen to the music countdown together. So if that's moved, they literally helped this shift of people from this one date that causes kind of hurt to a date that's more neutral.
Right. And just if I can interject, it seems important that you're highlighting Triple J because it's a popular music station.
Exactly. And they have so much influence.
A lot of the celebration.
Exactly. They have so much influence, and it was such a small thing for them to do, and it's created this massive shift. So I think that was really cool. So I kind of diverged from your question a bit there.
No, it's totally fine. I think it very much relates. Yeah, this is representation, or I guess talking about it in the popular culture arena is it sounds like you are lauding it as the effective approach to these very theoretical, potentially abstract, very shameful conversations that people don't want to have.
Definitely, I think so. I think media and culture has such a strong influence, and I think it could be a very positive influence to getting past these very difficult issues that they will never have a very finite, easy solution. It's going to be a little bit messy. There's people who are going to be unhappy. There's going to be issues everywhere, but I think it's a great ease into that kind of shift, into a more, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, I think.
No, it's okay. Yeah, the words just didn't come out.
So that's when you're fishing for the thoughts inside your head. And
I was that's gone.
Something very recent and I guess in the public eye, particularly I think in Australian culture, is the recent kind of happenings in the USA, protests, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm intrigued, I guess, partially because we have a very America-centric perspective on this, and we take cues, I think, from the language of activism from the States. Do you have any thoughts about how we can, in a local context, respond to that global enterprise of anti-Blackness? Is this even our fight, or, how does it relate to the long conversations of indigeneity and sovereignty?
Yeah, I think we should definitely support the movements that are happening. I will never say that's not our fight, so let's not be a part of it. I think to help those kind of global shifts for the better, that everyone kind of needs to, stick together and speak up for the better. but it's kind of interesting to see everybody jump on this kind of, not bandwagon, but like this kind of issue at once. It's spread through social media like wildfire, but we've had so many issues in the past where there's barely any coverage. You know, things like this happen to our own people in our own country, and there's no massive uproar or riot either. And I think, I don't know for sure, but I think this again might come back to the shame. Like it's very easy to stand up against an enemy that's not your own turf, it's not your own place. But then, you know, to do that at home would kind of be like acknowledging the terrible things that happened in the past. So I think it's great to see people supporting these kind of things, but it's also a reflection on how we deal with our own issues as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think I really hope that that energy that we're seeing, at least online in certain circles, and the attention can be brought to the local context, to the police brutality that has been aimed disproportionately towards Aboriginal people and people of color locally, of deaths in custody, of, you know, just like all the things that are happening here that we're not having exactly the same energy for, broadly speaking.
Exactly.
We talked a lot about all these really important issues. Just to kind of summarize, for those who have maybe just joined us, or for for people like myself who get lost in conversation very easily, Phoebe works hard to connect her Indigenous culture with modern game design making and bring that culture to new audiences and also to local audiences. She's really proud of her culture and wants to figure out these ways of letting it shine, I guess, or be expressed to the world. And I think the theme that we're most recently talking about now is like the discomfort of how we deal with multiplicity of attention, of stories, of things that may seemingly be in conflict, and like how we weave our way through it. Is that fair to say? Like that's kind of what we've been talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with all that in mind, I guess I'm interested in looking at the future, which is, what do you hope will happen in the next few years, decades, centuries?
Yeah.
Good question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's definitely what I've reflected on before, though. I think I really hope that games, Indigenous made games, and games like Chaos Tavern's new game, is that it kind of acts as like stepping stone for people to jump off from, kind of like an inspiration. So we have seen lots of games that are very realism Indigenous games, which is so awesome to see. It's good to see that language and what's real represented in a video game, but seeing it in the sense that it's fantasy inspired, like what you can turn it into. It's like, don't be scared. If you do the right steps, you can do this. So hopefully this will then catch on, and we'll see it more often. It'll start to broaden that sense of fantasy and what fantasy can be from any kind of culture as well, not just Australian Indigenous culture, but like all cultures in the world. So I think that would be a great place to, in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later. And just that continually increase in representation of Indigenous people and like lots of different types of people. I think that's definitely a movement that's becoming more popular now, and it's really cool to see as well.
Yeah, we've seen like quite a few different games about Indigenous cultures worldwide, right? It's it's something that is slowly changing. Have you played any? Do you recommend any?
I will always come back to Never Alone by Eline Media. It's on Steam. It's this beautiful game about the Inupiat people of Canada, I think. Oh, I hope so. It's been a little while,
okay.
But it is.
I can look it up.
It's the most beautiful game I experienced a couple of years ago, actually, before I was really interested in video games as a career, and before I was like super proud of my culture. It's a story that is completely narrated in language, and the visuals, just everything that comes together is so beautiful, and it's just very thick in culture. And I remember thinking while I was playing, I was like, I wonder if I could make a video game about my culture like this. But then that got put away, and it's only surfaced recently. I'm like, oh, I am doing that now. That's kind of cool.
Living the dream. So you were inspired. I looked it up, by the way. I'm mispronouncing this. You said Inupiat?
Yeah, I believe
right?
so. Yeah.
A group of Alaska Natives.
That's it.
On the kind of like northern part of what is now called Canada-United States border.
Yeah.
And you played this game, and you were like, "Oh, this is a really great expression of culture. It's in language." And then suddenly, now you fast forward, you're making a game yourself about your culture.
Yeah, it's really weird full circle there.
I think that's like not that weird though. It's a good reflection on the fact that as we get more and more of this media, hopefully, I think this is almost certainly going to be true. You're going to inspire, the next generation of game designers to bring their own culture into the games.
Yeah, I hope so. I think I can just like see it. It's just like, imagine just playing games like this, like Never Alone, or a more fantasy version of cultures all around the world, and you're playing this game and experiencing this culture, and just knowing that that's literally on the other side of the planet, and you can play it in your own home. Like, that's really cool.
The broad idea that I'm getting out of this is that, like, as you became more proud of your culture, because I'm just to draw it back all the way to like earlier in our conversation when you were saying growing up you weren't necessarily ashamed, but you didn't feel proud. And there's an interesting, I think, like commonality or common that sounds really resonant to me and to other people, I'm sure, of like how cultures get assimilated and then it's like the difference is erased in an effort for unity or something. Sorry, this isn't. I've done the horrible thing of like this isn't a question. I'm just kind of trying to tie it all together.
It's okay.
And so, as we see more of these game experiences and people celebrating their own unique cultures, I think we're going to enjoy that multiplicity. As you say, like we'll be able to see all the different cultures of the world represented better, and not just have that homogeneity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, you're right. It is this weird separation between, white culture and then this kind of like separation, like bubble between anything that's Indigenous is like, ooh, it's so special. We can't touch it. And it's this whole like Oriental, like Indigenous like thing that it's this whole separate thing. It's like, why can't we just normalize it? Like that's what it is. It's literally half the planet is like living these cultures, and yet it's so special, and it is special. And that's another thing. This is a whole nother conversation. But being treated as this like very special thing. It's like, yes, we are special, but we're not so special that we're foreign. Like it's separate. This is, you're living in our like land. We're all together. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah. That's a really great way to look at it. I think that like in otherizing or exoticizing these cultures of like people whose land we are on, it somehow cements the position as minority as opposed to recognizing that we are visitors and guests or non-Indigenous people. Wow. Okay. I'm really grateful for this time. It's been such a great conversation. Thank you for letting me like figure some of these things out by talking and asking crap questions.
No, thank you so much for having me. I always love diving into these little nitpicky, like usually I would shy away from these kind of conversations, but I think the more I talk about it, the more it's really great to unpack it and know that there's not this one answer to it all. It's good to talk about.
Totally. I'm sorry. I just like buzzed out because somebody tried to call me and I'm on my 4G.
That's okay.
So I might have frozen for a second, but yes, I'm grateful that we got to talk about those things too. I don't know if I'm.
Oh, you froze. I'll be back in a minute.
Oh.
Are you
Can you
back?
hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, did I just like leave you awkwardly hanging
That's
for a minute?
okay.
This is the constant frustration of like terrible internet. Anyway, okay, let me remove that person from the stream.
Yeah.
Thank you once again, Phoebe. It's been such a pleasure.
No, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed having this conversation.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for putting up with technical difficulties. I have a whole slide for it. We're experiencing technical difficulties. You are watching The Distillery, a series of online interviews. There's usually a daily interview, but I think I'm going to take a break for a few days because I've been doing this for now quite a few episodes. This is like the 21st episode or something. But we will be back, I think on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So see you all in June. Do check out the episodes on distillery.site. Follow us on Instagram at distillery.site or at Distillery Site on Twitter. One day I'll get good at saying all these social media handles. Today is not the day. Take care, everyone.